With the NFL offseason officially here, there are plenty of Baltimore Ravens rumblings already happening, particularly around some big names.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Appreciate everybody for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day. Thanks to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners, if you're somewhere in the middle, thank you as well. We have 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage here for you on the show. And here on today's show, we're going to dive into some Ravens rumblings already swirling, particularly around the trade market, but we'll also dive into Lamar Jackson's contract situation and how that's going to impact things over the coming days, weeks, or months, however long that thing takes to resolve itself. And then we'll move into some off-season needs as well for this Ravens team. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with a bet on FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Here with me to dive into everything today, it is Brian McFarland, Ravens salary cap of Russell Street Report, a Ravens and NFL salary cap expert. And Brian, thanks for coming back on the show. It's a busy time now. Again, we're recording this day one officially of the NFL offseason for everybody. And of course, there are a lot of questions about how this Ravens team can improve after a disappointing year last season. And I think there are a lot of different avenues they can do it.
Yeah. This is my time of the year. Obviously, the next 2 months pretty much is salary cap time. So we'll see what happens. They've got some work to do. Obviously, we'll get into that. Lamar's contract is probably paramount to that. But there's some other things they can do. They don't have a lot of options this year. So that Lamar contract is the big one at this point for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I want to dive specifically into that in the second part of the show with you. And it all kind of links together, doesn't it, Brian, with how this works, it impacts that, and how that works, it impacts this. But I want to start off with some of these rumblings we've heard about over the last couple of days and over the last week or so. And we'll talk about a couple of big names here first. First off, let's start with A.J. Brown. Obviously, he's a guy in Philadelphia who there have been a lot of questions about his future, and Derrick Henry did a whole recruitment tour this past week at the Super Bowl, even to A.J. Brown's face, to get A.J. Brown to Baltimore. First did it on the Kay Adams show. He and Cooper DeJean were duking it out on set for A.J. Brown, and then he was on, I think, a stream, and he said, A.J. Brown to Baltimore, whatever that message was. Brown is a really intriguing player for me. He's someone that I've been a fan of since the draft process back in 2019. He was my #1 receiver on the board. Baltimore goes with Marquise Brown instead. They have Zay Flowers, they're going to have to make a decision on with an extension or his future in the coming years. Rashod Bateman, they signed him to that deal last year. Wide receiver is an interesting spot because I think, Brian, a lot of people look at Baltimore's needs and it's trenches, offensive line, defensive line, and rightfully so. What would a trade for Brown look like, particularly because I know for Philadelphia, things get a little bit complicated with the money and how things work. How tradable is that contract for Philadelphia, and how tradable is it for Baltimore to receive a deal like that on top of whatever compensation that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a big contract. It's laid out differently than most contracts. It's kind of the way it's set up now. Now that not that they couldn't trade for him and redo the whole deal, which they probably would. But the way it's set up now, he has minimum base salaries every year and then huge roster bonuses. So that it's almost, or option bonuses, I should say. So it's almost like the deal is pre-renegotiated. It's cumbersome for both sides, really. But I mean, so they're big numbers. It's about, I think this year would only be about 20 in cash. I'm sorry. Yeah, it'd be about 30 in cash next year. It goes down, then it comes back up to about 30 each year. They would probably work around that with just a signing bonus and kind of spread that out. It's tough for the Eagles. Tougher for the Eagles because I think it's like 40 million in dead money. So it's about 22 or 23 more than he actually counts presently. So they would probably want to do the trade after June 1st. so they can spread that dead money out over the 2 years. And this is if the Eagles are even interested, and whether they are or not, who knows? Obviously, there have been some issues there, so they might be interested, but they might not be interested from a salary cap perspective, because it just doesn't make sense. So,
Right.
I would be surprised if that happens. But it would be possible that the Ravens will have enough cap space to accommodate his present cap number, and then which again is about 20 for them this year. And then they can move up, then they can move on from then. His roster bonus isn't due till September 1, so that's not a problem for the Eagles of having to do it sooner. So they can wait till after June 1. Picking up a wide receiver after June 1 probably is okay. You don't want to pick up a quarterback after June 1 and try to get them acclimated in a couple months before training camp. And then training camp, you want them here the whole year, or the whole off season, I should say. But
Right.
Wide receiver, probably not so much, but you run the risk of waiting and he gets hurt or these all kinds of things happen. So, I would be surprised if that one happens. Not that the wide receiver room is great, and obviously it seemed like they took a step back this year. I mean, the whole offense did. Whether a healthy Lamar makes a total different, it makes everything different there. Obviously, you don't have Cooper Rush quarterback in a couple of games, and Huntley's not a downfield guy either. So if Lamar's healthy, hopefully it looks like last year, and Bateman has a better bounces back, and whoever the third wide receiver is comes in. And then, as you said, they have to make a decision on Zay Flowers. That's going to be a big number next year for his 5th-year option. We saw them decline that with Linderbaum. Now that was a different situation, but it was a bigger number than they wanted to pay. So that'll be interesting. That decision is the Monday after the draft, not till first week of May. So they've got some time to figure that out, whether they want to use that. Now, if they use their number 14 on a wide receiver, maybe that changes how they handle Brown. Who knows? But Brown is an established wide receiver, so, and they could always trade him next year if they get, if they put the 5th-year option on him. Not saying they would do that, but I mean, they do have options beyond that. If they want to keep him, it's better to, get a long-term deal done so you don't, before you get to that 5th-year option, so that big number doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation too, Brian, because with the new coaching shift that has happened, it's going to change a lot of like what positions Baltimore prioritizes or doesn't prioritize. Like, I'm sure in a Declan Doyle offense, how important is fullback? Is that something that he's going to be using? Yep. And, is that the end of that? But hey, maybe you're going to run a lot more receiver sets, like multiple wide receiver sets out there. So do you prioritize that position and put more money into that position? Maybe you spend less on secondary. Maybe you put more into your defensive line or the guard positions. Like there's so much of that. And I think that when you talked about kind of the way that A.J. Brown's contract is structured, one of the interesting things is I want to move on and talk a little bit about Maxx Crosby, because again, it's all linked to each other. Crosby's deal is a little bit different where he has huge base salary numbers on that contract. So there's been a lot of rumblings, Jeremy Fowler named the Ravens along with a couple of other teams as, kind of a natural fit for Crosby. The actual wording that he used was a natural would-be contender for Crosby. Expect there to be a lot of interest around the league. It's been made clear by some insiders that Crosby's done with the Raiders. Crosby himself said that he, Las Vegas is a place that he likes, but, he also wants to win. And so there's a lot of different things that potentially could go into Crosby's future. How would a deal like that? Because again, there's been a lot of like mock trades, Brian. I'm sure you might have seen them roaming around, and it's multiple first round picks, maybe a young player or two, and that on top of whatever this deal is. I mean, that's a lot for a really awesome elite player, by the way. But how do you think a deal like that would look for Baltimore, and would it make sense based off of the contract and what reportedly could be asked?
Yeah, I mean, the contract, they can work around that. And the Raiders can get rid of him pretty easily. That one's not a lot of pain there. I think it's about, is it like 10 million in dead money, less than that for them. So that's not, whereas the Eagles, obviously that's a factor in the AJ Brown, but it's not for the Raiders if they wanted to do that. The 30 million, that could be worked around. I mean, technically, you have to have that cap space to acquire the player. Now, obviously, if they get Lamar done before then, they'll have plenty. And then they would redo that. I mean, there's two different ways of doing it. I mean, these do big money. They would probably redo the whole deal, bring that 30 down to, 15, on a first year cap number, maybe add another year of void years on the end, give them a big bonus and kind of move that. Next year's numbers his cash is 29. So maybe they drop that down to, 25 and, just save a little extra money or balance it out because there's going to be a bonus coming in to add to that. So, his contract's probably a little more workable, even though it is big numbers, but the draft pick compensation is going to be, much more for him. I mean, you're looking at a first round pick. I don't think you're looking at a first round pick for AJ Brown. I would say if there is going to be one move, that would be my move, but that is going to be a lot of draft pick compensation. And, that's hard to part with sometimes.
Yeah, especially when the Ravens have not necessarily given us that history of parting with big time draft picks like that. When they traded a second for Roquan, everyone was like, whoa, a second round pick. That's crazy. But now you're talking about a first rounder, maybe multiple first rounders. To me, Brian, I'm in the category of like, I'll believe it when I see it with a move like that. But you already have, again, the Ravens being connected to some big time names and in one way or the other very early again in this process. But I'm curious to see if anything amounts to it in that situation. But coming up in the second part of the show, Brian and I will be diving into the Ravens cap situation as it stands right now. And of course, how important that Lamar Jackson contract situation is as we more quicker than you think approach the free agency period here in the NFL. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty coming up on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following Winter Games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action, the drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast. Speed skating races decided by inches. Hockey games that feel different right from the opening face-off. Even niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked in to the competition. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. In the Olympics, they are incredible when they happen, and FanDuel has you covered with everything you need. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Back here, Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher and Brian McFarland still here with you, talking Ravens football, the Ravens salary cap situation, and of course, the Ravens being linked in one way or another, whether it be Derrick Henry doing his recruitment tours or insiders doing it. So a couple of big names already. Appreciate everybody for being here and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We, again, have 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage and content. And also, if you want some extra add-on content, we have the Everydayer Club, which is live now on Locked On Ravens. You get a lot of other cool things along with that. So if you're interested, be sure to click the link in the description below, as well as on the Locked On website on the Locked On Ravens page. But Brian, before we get in any other conversation, particularly about Lamar Jackson, just the Ravens in general, I want to have that general Ravens conversation about where their cap situation is right now. They signed a couple of guys to extensions during the season, and now we know that they still have some big time, whether it be free agents to hopefully re-sign or guys who are eligible for extensions that could help the Ravens free up some cap space. Where are they at right now? How good are they in terms of cap space and I guess the health of their cap situation right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's not too bad. They've got about 22 million in cap space at this moment. There's still a lot more that has to be done. They've one decision they're going to have to make is Keaton Mitchell. He's a restricted free agent. They could extend him, which would be the best way to do it to keep his cap number reasonable. But he's as an undrafted free agent. There's no draft pick compensation if he signs an offer sheet with somebody else and you let him go. They do have the right to match, and that's in the $3.5 to $4 million range until the cap is totally set. We don't know the exact numbers on these things, but if they want to secure him for sure, and a long-term deal isn't worked out, then you're looking at the second round restricted free agent tender, which is what they did with Darius Washington last year. Basically same kind of scenario. So that takes that down to about 12 with the other exclusive rights free agents that they'll probably tender as well. So, that's where then you get to the Lamar contract. I mean, I think Broderick Washington is probably gone. That's $4 million. I think he would have been playing for that contract for this last year of his contract this year, and obviously got hurt. And then there was a setback. So, I don't know what kind of prognosis he has going forward, but that's $4 million. So that's, again, not huge, but not insubstantial. And then they're going to have some decisions with Roquan and Marlon. Obviously, both of them, there's going to be a lot of dead money if they move on from them, but that's sunk money. It's already gone. I know fans complain about all the dead money on the cap and this and that, but they're going to count that. He's going to count that. They're counting that much on the cap anyway, whether they're here or not. That 20 million in dead money is going to be here or not. So if you can save 7 million each, do you move on from them? I have a feeling Roquan will be here at that number. Marlon, I think, is only back if he takes a pay cut. And they may decide that they don't want him back anyway, and then they have to decide whether they want the 7 million this year and take him off the books, or get 20 million, almost 20 million this year, but throw another 12 onto in dead money onto next year's cap. So that's kind of the balancing act there. And obviously the big decision or the big variable is getting Lamar done. As you mentioned, Steve Bisciotti made it clear they're going to do something one way or another with or without Lamar. Yeah. Ideally, it's an extension because it just makes next year not a problem. And, he did negotiate himself, and he did a great job, even if he didn't have an agent. He negotiated himself a no tag clause after 17. So you don't, not that he doesn't have all the leverage in the world already, but it's even compounded more if they have to punt it this year and deal with it next year, because the cap number is going to be higher. And then you almost might have to trade him at that point. I don't want to even think about that, but if you can't get it done next year, then that's pretty much the only option, because you're going to have a $80+ million cap number if they restructure him. So again, the extension is the right way to go. Extension probably gets him 25 to 30 million. Actually, a restructure would get them more than that. But again, that's not, if they get an extension and get 25 to 30 realistically in cap savings, that would be ideal. And along with some of the other moves, then they would be in plenty good shape.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because again, you want to have it all figured out. And, Lamar is able to come back they have to come back to the table this year with the amount of cap that it is right now. But in terms of just kind of, is this the first domino, do you think, Brian, that has to drop? Can they sign Linderbaum to an extension and then figure out Lamar's situation? Can they sign maybe a guy like Charlie Kohler to an extension? Because again, I'd assume that they're going to try to backload some of those deals. And if it's a 3-year deal, maybe it's a 2-year deal, you can get out of it after the second year of the 3-year contract. Like, how important is it to get Lamar's deal done first, or just have that situation resolved first? Or is there a way that they can still operate without having that being solved?
Well, assuming, Bisciotti was probably bluffing to an extent, but assuming that they will restructure, no matter if they can't get something done, they don't have to be under the cap until the 11th at 4:00. So they can sign, they could sign Linderbaum to an extension. They could sign a bunch of guys to an extensions, and that would technically put them over the cap, but they have till 4:00 on the 11th to get under. So if they can't get something, so that's the deadline, I would say, because at that point they're going to have to restructure him. And once they restructure him, you can still sign into an extension, but then his cap number is going to go back up, because you've already restructured. I guess they could kind of do a half a restructure, so to speak, and not a full restructure. But once he gets a big sign, he's getting basically his salary turned into a bonus. But then if you give him a real signing bonus, because you've given him an extension, because all the restructure is doing is moving the money he's due around for it's just math. So it's not extra money.
Yeah.
But what it's done is it's lowered his cap number this year, but there's nothing else to reach. There's nothing else to move around. So then he gets a $80 million signing bonus over 5 years. And that's, that's 16 million just from the bonus that goes back on the cap. So that's where it gets tricky. So, I'm sure they're going to push to get something done. I feel like it should be easier this time because the last time there was still the specter of fully guaranteed money and, things like that. And Watson had just gotten his deal. And obviously now we have evidence that fully guaranteed isn't always the greatest thing. Now, Lamar was probably the guy to get that more than Watson, but, and now, and obviously all that, Lamar went from, 3 years ago being the highest paid to being the eighth, I think it is somewhere in that range now, 8, 9, 10. So, but none of those deals were fully guaranteed. So I feel like that should make it easier. But as we've seen in the past, nothing seems to be easy when it comes to, Lamar and contracts. I'm not blaming Lamar in that. I mean, but,
Right.
That's just, that's where again, he negotiated a great contract for himself, but sometimes having an agent can smooth these things over. And it's got to be tough for a general manager when, if you have an agent, you got to say, because you're comparing your player to other players and value. And it's for an agent, it's easy to tell the agent that and the agent say, okay, I see where you're coming from. And then they go back to the player, but they don't have to tell the player that they just compared you to him, and we know you're better than him. Whereas if you're doing it with the player, it's got to be hard. So, but I think they should be able to get something done, but fingers crossed.
Yeah, that definitely the highest priority for the Ravens this offseason. It's going to allow them to free things up. And I do think, it is less stakes than last time because, that was Lamar on the non-exclusive tag. Is the team going to trade for him and 2 first-round picks? Is it enough? And they need to make him a Raven for life. And all this stuff was going on. But I mean, he's not a free agent right now. It's just a matter of freeing up the money to get him or to get the team in the best position. And again, Steve said, he made it very clear, hey, Lamar's our quarterback. I mean, that's where all this trade rumor stuff, and you hear the rumors from in the reports from Mike Garafolo about oh, well, he was involved in the head coach process and offensive coordinator process, and people will be flabbergasted if they moved him. I'm like, where was all this a week ago? And everybody was talking about the number 1 pick. That never made sense in the first place. So again, Lamar, super high priority, but he is not the only situation the Ravens have to figure out this offseason. So coming up, Brian and I will dive into some of the Ravens' other pending free agents, as well as what else they could do. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Back here, Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher, Brian McFarland. We're still here with you on this Tuesday talking Ravens football. And Brian, I'm really curious because we got, what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago? I can't even remember anymore, but the new salary cap number, the projection, the range dropped. And I think that you were already using around that, weren't you? The 301 to 305?
Yeah, I was using 305. So I've dropped it to 3035, which was, I think, right in the middle of that range. Hopefully it goes back to 305. So I mean, I was close in that, but and hopefully it'll still end up there. Usually when they give you that range, it usually ends up being on the higher range, on the higher end of the range. So let's hope it goes back up. But I want the numbers I was talking about earlier. I'm back to the 3055.
Okay.
So, or 3035.
Right.
So yeah, so we were right in that range. So nothing changed drastically. So, and I, like I said, hopefully it stays on the higher end of that, and we don't, because it goes down to the 3017, I think was the low end that, It's $1.5 million or so, but it still matters.
Right. Well, and that's what I'm curious about, because I think that it's an increase from what it was last year. Obviously, again, the projections were right along in that range, but is this going to potentially help them if it does go back to that 305 number? Could that even just be like they're able to re-sign one more guy? I'm not talking about like, oh, it means they can bring Likely back with an extra $1 million or anything. But, obviously Linderbaum is a big topic of conversation. Likely and Kohler are as well, although at this point, Brian, I've kind of just ruled out Isaiah Likely from coming back because of the Andrews extension. I feel like they're going to want to bring back Kohler anyway. It'd be tough to lose Likely, but it feels like that's where it's headed. For you, particularly, I guess, with Linderbaum, because that's the one everybody's talking about, where they did decline the fifth-year option. You talked about that earlier, where it made sense at the time because it would have reset the entire center market by like $5 or so million, and they would have been upping the price for themselves after this next season and the rest of the league as well. I've seen the projections out there. I mean, it can be I've seen anywhere from 17 million to 20 million. It's like along in that range. I expect them to probably break Creed's 18 million per season. But for you, easily, are you confident in the Ravens' ability to re-sign Linderbaum? Because it kind of feels like the Ronnie Stanley situation, where he was the one guy last year they needed to bring back. Feels like it's that with Linderbaum this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and obviously we have, we now unfortunately have the Giants, but I mean, there are going to be, there are obviously going to be teams out there. It wasn't like he's going to be a very popular guy one way or another, but now he's got his offensive coordinator in Cleveland. He's got his head coach in with the Giants. So there's that familiarity kind of thing. The Chargers would be a team because the center position was really awful for them. Now Greg Roman got fired, so maybe that, there's that connection there. Could you imagine the Harbaugh brothers negotiating, going back and forth trying to get him? Yeah, I mean, I've seen projections at 15, 16, 17. I don't see how he doesn't break 18, and it would not surprise me to see him get to 20. I don't know that the Ravens will go to 20. I'm not even sure the Ravens will go to 18. They've never paid a center. Jason Brown going back was, a top free agent that they let go. They've always gone, they've gone with undrafted free agents at times, over the years. So, or they've gone with veterans like Matt Burke, and Jeremy Zutaw for, going back a few years. So, I don't know. I would be, but he is, no offense to Jason Brown, but Linderbaum is, well, and it's also a first round pick. So that factors into the brain, the teams like and the Ravens for a long time did not let first round picks leave. They really didn't. Here and there were, but now they've done a little, been a little more lax in that approach. I guess not lax is probably not the right word, but but yeah, I mean, if it goes to 20, and I certainly feel like it could, I just don't see the Ravens going there. Not that that's a position you can unfortunately backfill with lesser guys and get, Bashadi talked about the 80-20 rule. Can you get a guy who plays 80% of the guy for 20% less, or whatever, however he defined that, or for 20% of the full. So, and obviously, when they drafted him, they, plugged him right in. So, and I think it was a first round pick, but, can you get a guy in the second or third or maybe fourth that you can plug in? They really liked Corey Bullock last year. So that's a factor as well. And obviously he was an undrafted free agent 2 years ago. That's a big step, obviously, but, if they liked what they saw, then that, they might pair him with a veteran and see who comes out, the winner, so to speak. But yeah, if it gets close to 20, I would just be surprised if they go there. It's not been their history. I mean, DaCosta is doing things differently than Ozzie did in the past, but that one just strikes me as maybe money spent elsewhere is a better thing.
And it's interesting too, because again, what I mentioned earlier about like the wide receiver spot and like the history there of like this, that's how Harbaugh did things. Maybe it's different for centers now, and that they are going to prioritize that more. So it'd definitely be, it'd be really disappointing for me if Linderbaum wasn't back. There's so much unknown about the situation. But I am curious, Brian, because there's been a lot of talk, about the Ravens over the past handful of off seasons. All right, this is the year they're going to make that big splash. It's going to be a wide receiver. It's going to be a big time safety or an edge guy. And now we're in this offseason where John Harbaugh is gone. Eric DeCosta is still in Baltimore. And I was saying last year, if I'm John Harbaugh and I'm feeling the type of way about how safe my job is or not safe, I'm banging down Eric DeCosta's door and says, go get me somebody this offseason because I need it. And that didn't happen. Harbaugh's gone. So now this year, Brian, if I'm Eric DeCosta, I'm banging on my own door and I'm saying, hey, we need to, this is the year. Do you think that out of all, go back as far as we can, I don't even know how far that would be, but do you think that this is the most likely offseason in the last handful of years that the Ravens actually make the move? They actually say, all right, we're going to make a splash. We're going to go and do something we haven't done before and trade a first round pick or any of that. If there was an offseason in the last, let's just say 5 years or whatnot, do you think that this is the most likely? It doesn't have to be a Crosby or a Brown or anybody of that nature, but I feel like this to me is an offseason that could be a little different than what we've normally seen from this Ravens team.
Yeah, it feels like it because obviously, especially if they only restructure Lamar and then you're looking at this year and maybe next year, and maybe he's gone after that. So your window has gotten really tight then. And I certainly hope it doesn't come to that. But yeah, I mean, let's face it, Lamar's going to be 29 this year. Or he is 29 already.
Yeah, 29 already.
Yeah. So, that window is starting to close, and I'm not saying they don't have 7 more years, whatever, but, I mean, Lamar also strikes me as a guy that might just say, 5 years from now, I'm done. I don't feel like beating myself up anymore, so you got to factor all that in. And yeah, so I think that window is shortening however long it is, but it's definitely shortening one way or another. And maybe it is time to really, try to maximize that. I mean, they've tried it different ways. They've gone younger here. They've gone, they've tried to build the wide receiver room from young, which, that didn't always work in the past. And, it's probably a better wide receiver room they've had in a while, certainly. It looked on paper to be even better last year with bringing Hopkins in, who I thought was a great signing and played, when he got the ball, he, produced. And I think, again, I think Lamar being injured, the offensive line being rough, to put it mildly, I think factored into all of that. So, I mean, I still have faith in Bateman will be fine if they can keep Lamar healthy and keep him upright. I don't think Bateman's going to be an issue. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it could be the year for them to do that splash. If there is one, it's got to be this year or next year, probably.
Yeah, and as Derrick Henry said, AJ to the Ravens to the flock. That's what he said on the stream. So maybe that's what happens. Maybe it is a Crosby or maybe it's something less. But there are also a bunch of different free agent options. Maybe a Trey Hendrickson on the edge. Maybe a Khalil Mack. You can look to the O-line potentially, although normally a lot of good O-linemen don't hit free agency, which is why I hope they can get something done with Linderbaum. But we will see how it all unfolds. Brian, I appreciate you. Thanks so much for hopping on the way out. Be sure to tell people where they can find you and what you're working on.
Sure. So a Russell Street report right there.
There you go.
Is where you'll find my articles right now. There are 2 articles up. One on kind of the offseason timeline as far as the important dates between here and basically the season. But obviously, one date coming up, first date really coming up is March 1st. That's when DeAndre Hopkins' contract voids. Tylan Wallace's contract voids. They're already factored. Those numbers are already factored in, so they're not gonna cost any more. But if they extend either of them, they can reduce that number some and spread that out, so the money won't accelerate into this year. So from that standpoint, that's kind of the first date. But obviously, franchise tag and beginning of league year and all that kind of stuff is in that. And then my big preview article came out about 2 weeks ago. I just updated it with the new cap number. That's on Russell Street Report. And then as breaking news happens, Twitter/X, I'm there to try to put it together. And as soon as we get numbers, get those together and get them out to the masses so we can make some sense of this move or that move or who gets cut and those kinds of things, or who gets signed and who gets extended. So hopefully a bunch of those.
Yeah. Awesome. Brian does awesome work. Be sure to check out all his work. Links will be in the description down below. Brian, I appreciate you again. Thanks so much
Anytime.
for hopping on. And thanks to everybody who watched and listened today to Locked On Ravens. Coming up, we'll be back here with more daily Ravens coverage and content. So be sure on the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form, follow along and subscribe in audio form. And I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.